who even says web anymore? But yeah, I scoured the internet
Well,
for
you've
some
been around since the
information.
90s, dude.
Yeah, yeah.
You started surfing the web. Johnny was surfing the web.
The young
He
guns are going to
found
be hearing
web.
this and be like, "Hey, mom, what does web mean?" Guy said he was
Yeah.
scouring the web, but
Yeah.
I looked online, and that's when, yeah, I saw your name, and that's your name kept popping up like all over the place, and I'm like, okay, let me give this guy a call and see if I can get any help here. Yeah, and that's how it kind of started.
And I think he got 5 to 7 lots, right, in our first couple campaigns.
That's right.
Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to the King Show. I've got a great guest for you today. A guest who's not just an investor, also an entrepreneur who's owned his own business prior to getting into real estate investing. And man, this is a high energy dude with a lot of passion for what he does. Also a lot of positivity. You're going to pick up on that right away. And we connected, and I was fortunate enough to, do some one-on-one coaching with Johnny. So I'm going to kind of introduce Johnny here from my buddy from across the border to the north here. Hey, Johnny, how's it going?
Going good. Thanks for having me, Travis.
Hey, yeah. Why don't you tell everybody where you're dialing in from, where you're based out of, and kind of give a little bio before we jump into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Montreal, Quebec in Canada. Really great city, very culturally diverse. Just, gets a little too cold here in the wintertime. But other than that, I was born and raised here. I became a personal trainer probably around the time I was in my early 20s. I started off in computer programming because my dad said, hey, it was like 1995 or 1996. He's like, the whole future is computer. So I went into that. I just didn't feel it, and got into personal training shortly after. And I just, loved helping people. Right. So from there, I opened up my own place in 20.
Well, short of knowing how to run the CRM and keeping track of clients, I wouldn't think there's a whole bunch of like transferable skills there from computer science to personal training. Is that right?
Well, see, you know what? So the thing is that at that time it was super fun, right? This was like the advent of like the internet, right? So I think it was like 96 or 97, and that part was fun. So I just figured, hey, computers is going to be this easy. And then when I got into it, it was like a lot of writing code, and I'm like, oh God, this stuff was just so boring for me.
Yeah.
And so it was different, and I came home and told my dad, I'm like, listen, it's one thing to actually like be on the computer, but it's another thing to like kind of like write the code or build it. So anyways, he understood as long as, I did something that I liked. But so from
pivot, and is it into personal training? Is that because you got a passion for working out yourself, or what made you get into personal training?
Yeah, I started training. So I've always trained for sports, right? I've played hockey since I was a young kid. I mean, in Canada, it's kind of like the law. You have to play hockey.
It's law or religion, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's how it kind of started. And I started training for hockey, and then, I just loved it, and just made everything about my day better, right? And also made me a better hockey player. But and from there, I just kind of realized, I pretty much lived at the gym, at a certain point, and a lot of my buddies that would come and train, they didn't know where to start. So I'd just be like, hey, let's, today we're gonna do this and that, and then from there, just kind of realize, hey, you know what, like I got a passion for this, right? Like, I mean, it's really cool to be able to help people out, and and especially when like the word would get around, like, hey man, Johnny's like,
hey, Johnny's doing free workouts, guys.
Yeah.
Right. He's got an upper body, lower body free workout. Just go hang out with him at the gym, right? Then you go, hey, maybe I could charge for this.
And that's the thing, right? So so I started to do that, and I just went to a local gym, and I'm like, hey, do you guys need any trainers? I took a few courses, and from there, kind of built up a pretty big client list, and keep in mind, back then social media wasn't really a thing, right? So other than Facebook, I mean, your only source of advertising was like, word of mouth. But, I was doing pretty well for myself. And then somebody approached me just to say, hey, like, would you be interested in kind of opening up a training center, right? And we kind of had like the same visions, and that's what we did. We opened up our own place in 2012. And did that pretty much until
what's that shift like from being the kind of the the solo trainer, right? Where you just show up in somebody else's space, you do your job, you collect your pay,
Oh
versus
man,
like having the weight and responsibility of the being a business owner. What's that look like?
it is completely different. I mean, it was a whole different world. I mean, you're going from like, checking in, taking your clients and checking out, and you're not really concerned about, if there's a light bulb that's broken in the men's washroom, or,
Yeah.
there's something leaking, or there's a bar that broke. I mean, when I was working at the gym, I just took all my clients, trained them, and then went home, and that was it. But as a business owner, you're like, thrust into this world, and everything is like, now you got to worry about every single aspect of it. And we ran a small gym. I mean, we weren't, one of these big box gyms. And we still, I mean, we were between 3 and 4 partners for the duration of 12 years. And thank God, because I mean, it was kind of, everybody had their own roles and duties. And, like I said, we weren't a big gym, but there was accounting and marketing and taking care of staff, right? And making sure that everybody is up to date with their certifications. And
Well, and then there's also the things you don't talk about when you go, hey, dude, you want to start a gym together? Right? Let's be owner. There's nobody goes, who wants to be the facilities guy? Right? Because like you
yeah,
said, you don't realize that, hey, that's a thing, that's a role. Like either we got to share it or do it ourselves, or we got to hire somebody, right? So there is a lot of the building maintenance, right? That
yeah.
piece of it is probably, I would think, would be an oversight when you're kind of pumped about starting the new business, right?
Absolutely. And we were kind of lucky in that regard, because what happened was, my partner at the time, he was working out of another gym. And actually, the way we met was I was training, this kid, he must have been a teenager, 15 or 16, for hockey. And my partner was training his mother at another gym. And that's how we kind of met. But he was already working out of another gym. And we actually ended up buying the gym that he worked out of. So we were lucky enough that we had all the equipment in place, and we had the structure, and everything was there. I mean, we gave it a total facelift, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
painted and put new floorings and everything, and that in itself as well, right? I mean, a couple of weeks of just painting and bringing in the rubber flooring. And if anybody's, like if you ever walk into like a CrossFit gym or something, and you're on those like 4x6 rubber mats, nobody realizes just how heavy they are. They're 100 pounds each.
It's
And
probably one of the heavier things in the gym. It's kind of like they have used a similar thing with horse stalls. If you've ever been on a farm or a ranch, right? They
okay,
have the thick black mats, right? You can spray, clean them off. It's almost identical to that thick, heavy black gym mat where you try to lift that up. It's not like a sheet of a sheet of plywood or drywall, right? You try to lift up those mats, you're like, holy smokes.
yeah, they're like 3/4 inch thick,
Yeah.
and they weighed 100 pounds. And we had about, I would say, 10,000 square feet of flooring to do. And let me tell you something, by like the end of, maybe after about an hour or two, your fingers and thumbs are like numb. They've numbed out, because like you're carrying these things, and it's hard to hold them, right? So you're holding them literally by your fingertips and thumbs. And yeah, I mean, those are all the things that people don't take into consideration, and they don't even, like, oh, nice place, right? But
Nice
yeah,
place. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And
So
you're like, that's work. So that's the beauty of it, though, is like it gives you, I feel like all that stuff gives you a frame of reference for when you find something that you go, okay, this is revenue, but it's not work. Like, it's not like work
and
or man hour. It's not sweat equity, right? You're
exactly.
capturing equity. So at what point did you kind of go, okay, I want to do something outside of this and kind of get into real estate investing?
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? A lot of my clients are a lot of they're very successful people, right? These are people. I mean, and I always said, right? I mean, if most people that have a personal trainer, I mean, it's kind of a luxury, right? I mean, not
Yeah.
everybody can afford, depending on what the trainer is charging. But I mean, the ongoing rates, at any given time can be anywhere between, 60, $70 an hour, ranging all the way up to 300-400 an hour, right? And it is a luxury, right? So a lot of people that I had as clients were, they were established professionals, and a lot of them were in real estate. And I would hear them talk, and I didn't know anything about, rentals, or, fix and flips and any of that stuff. I mean, I had heard about it, seen them on TV shows, but I guess it kind of never, it's kind of like that saying, like the ignorant person says no. Like I didn't know enough about it. So I'm like, hey, you know what? Like, I won't even ask. But it just got intriguing. And, you know, like a lot of times they would either have to cancel because they had to go notarize some documents on a
Yeah.
new building they bought. And then I
I've
would
got to
kind of
go
ask,
get paid. I've got to sign a closing, right, or get a commission or get a wire, right? Like I can't pay your measly $70 an hour. I got to
yeah,
go get a 20 grand wire or something.
pretty much. Like I would have them literally leave mid-session. They would get a phone call, be like, "Oh, I got to go to the property, or this happened or that happened." And you know, I would just ask, right? So, hey, so what do you got, right? And they would tell me, "Oh, you know, we have buildings here, we have properties there." And I started to get a little bit more interested. And then, and that's when actually my first ever client, he's now actually partnered with me on a few deals here for land, but he was my first ever client, and he had a lot of property, and he just kind of like showed me the ropes, right? And at one point I'm like, hey, I think I'm ready to, you know, buy my first rental, right? And this was maybe around 2016 or 2015. And at the time I thought the prices were crazy, but they were actually
And this is
really
up
good.
in Canada. This is in Montreal, or
This is in Montreal, yeah. So you know, and at the time, I mean, prices were slowly starting to go up, right? And it started out west in Vancouver, British Columbia, and it slowly started to move east, right? And you know, now prices here are insane. But at the time, I remember I was looking at a couple of rentals, and yeah, just with the help of some of my clients, they referred me inspectors and people to go see, agents to talk to, and that's what I did, right? And pretty much did that for a year, but I couldn't find anything that really kind of like met the numbers, like the criteria that I was told to look for. And I kind of just stopped, right? Then my dad had passed in 2016, so that kind of like halted things after, you know, after that for like a couple months. I didn't, you know, I didn't really go back into that. And funny story, around 2018, or was it right before COVID? Yeah, so I guess it was 2019. My wife and I were actually, you know, we had just thought about buying, like I don't know why we laugh about it today, but we want to buy a vegan restaurant, like be part of a franchise, be a franchisee of a
yeah,
big vegan chain here. I mean, and they're no longer in business, or I think they maybe have like just a couple of stores. So thank God. But what happened was I remember driving, and I had met with the so one of my partners from the gym. He and I were kind of talking about this, and we're like, hey, you know, and this is, you know, because I had gone vegan in 2017, so you know, and it was all the, you know, it was all the trend, right? And
yeah,
so we kind of saw a market for it. And what happened was I remember a meeting with the franchisee, one of the you know, head honchos there, and he's like, hey, look, he's like, do you have any you know, specific places in mind? And I had given him some neighborhoods in where I live of where I thought it would do good. And you know, he ran the software. He
yeah.
had a software that kind of ran like all the demographics, and everything kind of checked out. So he's like, hey, great, listen, go look for a spot and get back to me, right? So I find this vacant lot, you know, and they're building condos there. They're putting up huge condos, and I walk in and I'm like, hey, are you guys gonna have some commercial space here at the bottom? And they're like, yeah, but you know, we're only taking applications for any type of retail storefront in like a year or two. So I'm like, so what are you guys doing here? And at the time, I remember talking to this lady, and I see like 5 or 6 people outside on their lawn chairs. And I'm like, what's going on here? And she's like, well, we're building condos. It's gonna be like a high rise 30 story building. And I'm like, why are these people outside? She's like, well, they're waiting for the pre-sale. And I'm like, when does that start? She's like, in 4 days. I'm like, wait a minute. So they're sleeping outside? She's like, yeah. She goes, this is a huge project. And I'm like, well, how big is this project? So she kind of starts talking to me about it. And as she's talking, I literally see more people coming and camp out. And the pre-sale was only like 4 days from then. So I'm like, this must be something great. So I called my wife and I'm like, hey, listen, you know, not that, I mean, I do suffer from shiny object syndrome, but I'm
You're
like,
like,
this is
babe, bring me a sleeping bag and a lawn chair. I'm gonna
so
be here for 4 days.
well, that's what I told her. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm like, we might just pivot. I'm like, I always want to buy a rental. And I'm like, I think this is a great opportunity. I'm like, we just have to camp out for 4 days. She's like, what do you mean? I go, there are people here that are camping out because there is a sale, and these condos are going to go up pre-sale in 4 days, and people are already waiting in line. And the lady I was talking to, she's like, hey, you can actually download an app where you can get people to come in and sleep for you. They actually reserve your spot. And I'm
I was
like,
gonna say
really?
only in America, but you're in Canada, so that doesn't
Yeah,
apply. But
yeah.
that's pretty incredible.
I had never heard of that. So I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I downloaded the app. I got a hold of like 3 or 4 different people, and they literally slept outside. I mean, thank God it was summer. It was like, man, in
Yeah,
June or July or something. And they just camped out for 4 days, and that way I wouldn't lose my spot. And that's pretty much it. And that's how I got my first condo. We actually ended up buying 2 at that sale. And yeah, that was kind of like my introduction to rentals and real estate. And yeah, so
that was obviously like pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. So I would think that that was, what did you say, 2016?
when I bought the condos, the pre-sale was in 2019. They were actually
2019.
developed in 2021, but
So you
2019 is,
bought
yeah.
though before. What I'm getting at is, were you able to lock in on a price before kind of that craziness of COVID, right? Jumped things 15, maybe 20% in
Oh
2020.
yeah. Oh, definitely,
Did you
definitely.
guys experience a really similar, like in Canada is, down here in the States, where for us it was maybe 15 to 20% that properties went up within 12 months.
Travis, it got so crazy here that I'll never forget July of 2020. I mean, everybody was home at that time. And if you knew anybody in Canada, they can tell you, especially in Montreal, Quebec, the lockdowns were severe here.
Yeah.
And my wife and I were literally at the table, and we look outside and we see a lineup of people. It just so happened that one of my neighbors, who lives at the corner of my street, was selling her house, and there must have been about 100 people in line. They were just visiting. They had 15 minutes to visit, and
Like an open house you're
like an
talking about,
open
like in line
house.
for it.
Yeah, and it was like they were, like in line to see a concert or something.
Yeah.
It was like worse than a Beyonce concert. It was like there was so many people, and this was just like to visit a house. And
I'm glad you didn't say a Diddy concert. Okay,
oh
I
yeah,
can. Not right now. Let's avoid
yeah,
that
not
right
right
now.
now. So yeah, so we ended up speaking to our neighbor, and we're like, hey, what's going on? You guys are selling, and they almost doubled. They almost doubled the price they paid in less than like 3 years that they were there. So they must have bought like in 2018, 2017, right?
Yeah.
I know because we bought here in 2015. So they came in like a year or two later. And yeah, so they pretty much doubled what they paid the house for. Just so, to answer your question, it got pretty crazy here too.
And
Yeah.
that's at the time. So you got some rental units, you got some condos, and did you start doing some other? Didn't you start doing some mortgage or note investing, or what were you doing in addition to that?
Yeah, exactly. So I was part of a meetup group, and I remember one night I get an email saying that there was this gentleman by the name of Nathan Turner. He was a Canadian, actually. His nickname is like the Canadian note guy, and he was giving a 1 hour thing speech on like a seminar on note investing, and I had no idea what this was about, right? And actually, this might have, I don't remember if this was before or after we bought the rentals, but it was around the same time. So I go to this meetup, right, and he's talking about how he buys these distressed assets, right?
Yeah.
And he's explaining to us how, like, banks in the U.S. Have to keep a certain ratio of debt to profit, right? And he's like, when the debt ratio is too high, a lot of these banks, they offload these assets,
Mhm.
right, these distressed assets. And he's like, then we pick them up for 20-30 cents on the dollar. And he was buying first position notes where we're a little bit pricier. And so I found that so intriguing. And I'm like, man, this sounds so cool. So I'm kind of like an all or nothing personality type,
Yeah.
right? So like I just dove in like head first. I'm like, okay, I am gonna like pretty much engulf myself with anything note related. So I bought a bunch of books and started looking online for conferences or shows. And yeah, so I got into that around the same time. Must have been 2018 or 2019. And our strategy back then was we were buying distressed assets in the second position, right? So we just kind of made sure that the homes had enough equity in them, so that way we can begin Well, I mean, the end goal is to always help the borrower, right? But at the same time, you also want to protect yourself that if you do have to foreclose on these homes, there is enough equity that you don't get kind of like wiped out, right? And so, yeah, we did that for a couple years, and then during COVID, everything came to a screeching halt. My gym business was
Well, with the lockdown, that's what people have to understand, right? As intense as it was stateside in the US here, dude, they're nuts in Canada, like just flat out nuts, right? About the lockdown was just so overkill, the response to it, that people that had a brick and mortar like you as an owner, right? Especially like a gym, right? Where we're in close proximity, right? We're huffing, puffing, like, so yeah, that's one of those things you don't see that in the SWOT analysis, right? When you're looking at that as a business model, like a worldwide pandemic and how it could affect the in-person gym business. And that's about because I remember that's about the time, or maybe shortly after, kind of when we connected, right? So maybe this is you're experiencing this is going on, right, for you.
yeah.
At some point during the lockdown is kind of when we connected, and you move from notes to land, or you find land investing.
Yeah. So, what happened was they had placed these moratoriums, right, where we couldn't collect from the borrowers during COVID, right? I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
people were without jobs, right? So, I guess it was the right thing to do. So, at the time, I needed something like, I'm like, okay, well, now what? Like, like, what's this? Like, what does this all mean for the note space? And I was listening to a podcast, yeah, and I heard about land. Actually, the podcast was held by one of the big guys in the note investing space, right? Because I mean, I was still much heavily involved in note investing, and it was something that I still wanted to continue. But I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm like, wow, land investing, and I'm like, and the first thing that struck a chord with me was the fact that you can do this for a tenth of the capital that you would need to buy mortgages, right? Like, I mean, the note space, as profitable as it can be, right? I mean, some of the challenges are that notes aren't as cheap, right? So I mean, you're picking up second position notes for anywhere between 20 to 50,000, sometimes even more, right? At least the ones I was going after.
Yeah.
But it land, I was like, wow, this is great. There's people talking about picking up like an acre lot for like $800, and I'm like, how, I didn't even know. I had no idea how big an acre was, and I'm like, okay, let me just see. Oh, okay, 43,000 square feet. I'm like, wow, all that for $800. I'm
Yeah.
like, well, something's got to be up here. And that's it. And then I just kind of again dove right in, started picking up, bought any book I could on the subject, and yeah, and that's when I kind of scoured the web. Who even says web anymore? But yeah, I scoured the internet
Well,
for
you've
some
been around since the
information.
'90s, dude. With it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you started surfing the web. Johnny was surfing the web.
The young
He
guns are going to
found
be hearing
web.
this and be like, "Hey, mom, what does web mean?" Guy said he was
Yeah.
scouring the web, but
Yeah.
yeah, no. So I looked online, and that's when I saw your name, and that's your name kept popping up like all over the place, and I'm like, okay, let me give this guy a call and see if I can get any help here. Yeah, and that's how it kind of started.
Yeah, and I recall that because kind of recall the conversation where you're telling me like, hey, we're I've got a pretty good salary essentially, or with from the gym. Here's what I'm doing, but like this COVID thing, right, is like basically robbing me of my my livelihood, my income. I got to scramble. I need fast traction, right? And you're like, and I was like, what would this look like to you if it were? How could this be successful? Basically, like what would make this? And you were like, well, if I could replace
Yeah,
replace this like six-figure income I just lost, that would be pretty cool, right? If I could keep feeding my family, right? Till we figure out this whole pandemic thing. And
yeah,
I remember we kicked off some campaigns initially. Kind of how you were introduced to the land was kind of the cheaper, smaller lot flipping strategy. And I said, hey, I can help you with whatever you want to do. Eventually, we probably want to be doing bigger deals, bigger lots, but I can help you with whatever you want to do. So we kind of did start smaller, under $10,000, retail value lots, but trying to pick those up for, I don't know, 25 cents, 30 cents on the dollar at the time. And I think he got 5 to 7 lots, right, in our first couple campaigns.
that's right. I got
Go ahead.
6, I think. No, I got 6, I think, and then one of them kind of fell through, but I ended up getting 5 signed, and that was actually, and I want to say this because I think it's important. The first campaign I had ever done actually was right before I met you. So, I had bought like one of these online courses and I kind of did what they said. And just a quick story here. The first campaign was an absolute flop. Like, I mean, it was so bad. And I'll never forget, I got a call. I pretty much found the market according to what I was, taught. And it worked. I mean, the numbers were good, right? And I'll never forget that first call I got. I was with a client and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, here it is. I go, I'm so sorry. I go, I think I'm just gonna, I got a property I gotta buy. I was so convinced. I'm like, I
Yeah.
see this number and it's a Florida number. And I answer and I get absolutely ripped to shreds. I got ripped to shreds. It was a lady, yelling at me. Her father had passed away and gave her this lot, and so obviously there was some like emotional equity there, and it meant dear, near and dear to her heart. And she just absolutely yelled at me for a good 3 minutes. And if you've ever been yelled at for 3 minutes, it's long. It's like
Yeah.
wow. And so I always
Oh,
tell
you're taking
people.
me back to my childhood, Johnny.
I tell people all the time, I'm like, hey, listen, man, you're gonna pay one way or another. So it's either you pay in mistakes or you pay in education. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's when I reached out to you, and
Yeah.
that's it, and the rest is history.
Well, I say it, often that cheap coaching, is really good, and good coaching is rarely cheap, right?
Exactly.
So sometimes you find somebody at that right time where they're just getting started, right? And you do get the good coaching cheap before they, right?
Yeah.
Before they get some traction, but usually there's a reason, right?
Yeah.
No, so we pick some markets, and that was the main thing I remember we talked about was, hey, we don't just want to buy the lots cheap. Like, we want to buy in markets that there's a demand or there's a buyer pool, right? Because you're not buying and holding, you're buying to flip,
Yeah.
right? So we had to look ahead and say, okay, like, are things moving in these markets, right? And then you lock up, we do some deals, we're coaching together, we do some smaller deals, and then we kind of start gradually doing a little bit bigger deals. And then you start, I kind of start talking to you about, well, hey, you can self fund as much as you want, but you just self funded all of those, right? And then we said, but when we get into the bigger deals where there's room, right, where there's room to split, it's tough to split a grape, right? It's
Yeah.
tough to split a mustard seed when we're dealing with these small deals. But when we get into kind of the watermelons and cantaloupes, right, we could split those. So we start talking about, hey, there is funding, there are funders, there are solutions out there. If it makes sense and you want to use somebody else's money and either not tie up all yours or not risk it. So you kind of embrace that hybrid of like, I'm going to self fund what makes sense for me, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to use other people's money for what makes sense, whether I want a second set of eyes on the due diligence or I just don't want to tie up all my capital. You kind of embrace that hybrid model of essentially buying the less expensive stuff self-funded
Yeah.
and then partnering, right, with, using capital funders or partners for the bigger stuff. That allows you, like, this is kind of a light bulb for a lot of people. It allows you to essentially go, okay, my main or only expense is marketing. Now that I'm not spending all this money buying the properties, right? When we start using other people's money to buy the properties, right? And that's for you. I feel like we did a couple nice profitable deals. I don't remember the order, man. It's all a blur, but
Yeah.
they all bleed together, right?
Yeah.
But then we come across one that was the first one you brought to me, and you're like, Travis, I think this has subdivide potential, right?
Yeah, that was a good one. I still remember the family name. She called me. Actually, it's funny because she had the initial lot we mailed out for. She called me back and she's like, yeah, that's not a problem. She's like, hey, this is a good price. And then, it's funny because she called me back and she's like, hey, you know what? She goes, you've been really, really nice with us and like professional with like, the whole process. And like, I was telling my parents about you and like, they've never been asked these questions before. And she's like, my dad's got a lot of land and he's slowly starting to unload them. And, she's like, he really appreciated the way you treated us with the first sale. So, well, actually, we hadn't even sold it. We hadn't bought it yet, but with the first lot that we had called upon, and she's like, yeah, she goes, he's got another one. It's like 15 acres, and at that time, that was like the biggest thing I had ever. I'm like,
Yeah.
15 acres. I'm like, oh wow, and yeah, so that's when I looked at it and I saw it had like access from like both sides, and I'm like, man, this. I mean, I hope I'm thinking right here, but this looks like a good subdivide
Well, and this is a
project,
big
right?
shift from, like you say, the first call, the previous call, where they're 3 minutes of yelling at you, to now somebody's going, Johnny,
Yeah.
you're such a nice guy. Can my
Yeah.
dad sell you his property too? Right? That's people, right? You know what I mean? We're going to hit
Yeah.
the extremes when we
Yeah.
blast marketing out there. We're going to get, a whole bunch of different personalities and emotional IQs coming back at us. So you're
Yeah.
going to have those extremes. That's the important thing, I think, is a lot of people, you get that first one and you're like, okay, this is not for me. I'm not cut out for this. And that, it's funny you had mentioned that earlier, because dude, this was probably 2 years ago. I quit counting, but 2 years ago I went through and was trying to calculate, because we were doing some stuff for marketing, like how many calls I had made, between acquisition calls and then disposition and sales calls when I used to sell myself. And we're at over 9,000 phone calls that I
Oh.
have, like 9,000 times I've been on the phone, right, and made a call.
Oh, wow.
And keep in mind, I harass people, so it might be three or four, one person 3 or 4 times, but like over 9,000 calls, right? And still to date, that first call for me, the guy was the biggest badger I've ever come across, man. I was brand new. I knew nothing hardly about what I was doing, right? And he beat me up. He's like, "Where'd you come up with this offer?" And he's like, "Where'd you come up with your price?" And I'm like, "Well, we kind of based it on, the assessed values. Like it's assessed at 4 or 5 times what you offered me." And I'm like, "Oh, well, sometimes, it's like, is the lot treed, or, and it basically, he's just like, this is a terrible, insulting, lowball offer, right? And then he's like, have you even driven this? And I said, well, no, I haven't, like, physically driven it. He's like, yeah, I know you haven't driven it, because you wouldn't even want to buy it from me at the price you're offering if you had driven it. And then he kind of explained to me, this is a paper subdivision. They never, the developers told us they would put in roads and sidewalks and utilities, and it never got any of that. It's just dirt.
Oh,
Right. But he just beat me up. And,
yeah.
and it was like, after that first call, I was like, I don't know that this is for me, man. And it really was kind of like hey, welcome to blind offers, right? Like, welcome to sending unsolicited offers. For those people listening, there's different marketing pieces we can send, where we kind of send an open letter. Like, you might see this with, like, We Buy Ugly Houses, right? Like, hey, are you
Yeah.
interested in selling your house? Give us a call. And then they get you in their database, their CRM, and can hammer you, right? But they don't
Yeah.
give you a price.
Yeah.
And then there's other times you actually get like a marketing piece that's like, we will pay X for your house, right? And it's obviously, because they're all investors just like us, it's always nowhere near what it's actually worth, right? Because we're trying to capture equity. And but when you send blind offers, unsolicited blind offers, like purchase agreements, and you offer at what we offer at 25% to 50% of retail, it doesn't bring out the best in people,
No.
right? So
No.
I love that you had a tough first call too, man, because mine had me rethinking if I was cut out for this, but kind of like you, I stuck with it. And then you eventually come across those other people who actually, you are solving their problem and you're helping them, right? And they appreciate it. And then you start to feel less like the inexperienced vulture investor, right? And I remember, so we had we had a smaller lot, and then, like you said, we had that 14 or 15 acre lot nearby, right? So the first one, you're saying you got a hold of a seller. What was that? Like a 1 to 3 acre, the smaller one?
It was a 3 acre lot, and the other one was 14.2, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And we look at it together. We're coaching, we review together. We look at the 14 acre. It's actually in Pinal County, Arizona. It's probably 45 minutes from my house. If I drove and look at properties, I would have drove and look at it for you, but I didn't, because I don't, and I won't, right? I refuse to. We let agents go drive out there and look at things for us. But I could have driven out to it, man. But I looked at it on Google Earth. We looked at it on the map, and what we noticed was, hey, there's, in the nearby area, there are a number of like 1 and 2 acre and 5 acre lots, right? And your property was 14 to 15 acres. It had road access on 2 boundaries, on the southern one and then on the east boundary.
That's right.
And that, what that does, that all that road frontage allows us to kind of subdivide or carve this thing up in almost any size we want. So we said, okay, what's it worth right now as is? And we want to make our offer based on that. But then we talked to our agent and said, what would it be worth if we subdivided it into these smaller parcels, right? Some 1 acres, some 1.25, some 2.5, and some 5s, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the math worked either way with what you got it at. I want to say you got it at 45, 47, 50% ish of as is value. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think both lots together we picked up for 75. We had yeah, I mean, we didn't really she sold them as a package deal. So she's like, "Hey, if you can give me 75 for both, they're yours, right?"
Yeah.
And I think just the 14 acre one alone had like an assessed value of I think 50,000 or something,
And
if I'm
we
not
thought a
mistaken.
market value of about 100, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. No, so that was sweet. That was like my first real introduction to like, okay, I've already had proof of concept with the smaller lots, but it
Yeah.
just kind of like opened my eyes like, okay, so this can be done, right? And we can like we can replicate this process anywhere and everywhere that it allows us to. So that was pretty cool.
Well, what I saw too, coaching, is it also opened you up to from kind of like reviewing the properties with the blinders on of like flip, flip, flip. We offer this, we can resell for this single parcel mindset. It kind of like expanded those blinders to the peripheral vision is now working, right? Where you go, okay, now when I look at a lot, I'm not just looking at the property. I'm going like I kind of instructed you, hey, let's look across the street. What are the size of the neighboring lots? You know what I mean? Did anybody
Yeah.
ever take a similar size property and cut it up, or like, you know what I mean? Let's look around at the opportunities surrounding the area and we'll see additional exit strategies.
Are you suffering from small deal syndrome? Struggling to close the big ones? You're not alone. Many investors feel inadequate when stepping up to larger deals, but there's hope for you. Small deal syndrome affects countless land investors, leaving them stuck fishing for minnows in a red ocean. Instead, imagine reeling in the big fish in Travis's blue ocean of big land deals. Introducing Land Boss Coaching, the ultimate solution for land investors ready to achieve big results. Our program helps you overcome hesitation, fear, and limiting beliefs so you can step up to the big leagues with confidence. With Land Boss Coaching, you'll learn to tackle bigger deals confidently. No pills or gimmicks, just proven strategies to help you perform at a higher level. Whether you thrive in a group setting or prefer personalized guidance, Travis King is here to help you unlock the untapped goldmine of flipping big land deals as a blue ocean investor. It's time to make your move. Leave small deal syndrome behind and perform like the land boss you were meant to be. Don't let another small deal leave you or your partner disappointed. Visit travisking.com today to explore our group coaching program or inquire about one-on-one coaching. Remember, the path to bigger deals and greater success is just a click away. Visit travisking.com and start your transformation today.
Yeah. And that's where with this one, I think we forced, on paper, we ended up having to do some price cuts, and the interest rates kind of went up during the middle of your subdivide. So things actually didn't sell as quick as we had planned, or for the list price, we had to do some cuts. But we had forced, I think, like 122,000 of appreciation just through subdividing. And I don't remember numbers, but I want to say it was like 12 to 14 or something to subdivide it. Does that sound right?
Sorry, 12 to 14 months. Is that what you're
12
saying?
to 14,000 to subdivide it. Was that right?
Oh, yeah. The lower end of that. Yeah, I think it was like around 12. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's around 12. I always like to go, right, 12 to 14. Then if I'm wrong high.
Yeah. Yeah.
12 to 14. We paid 12,000-ish to subdivide it, and that added 122,000 in value to the list price. Right?
That's right.
So that worked out to be a pretty sweet deal for you. And the first deal that was like, hey, we turned one acquisition into multiple dispositions, and right, we forced appreciation by just sending surveyors out there and having them carve it up. We didn't have to carry big heavy rubber mats in and sweat and do any work, right?
Exactly.
Same thing with the house. Like, I didn't have to put on a roof. I didn't have to paint the house. I didn't have to build retaining walls or do all these improvements, right? Like, we just sent surveyors out there and paid a land use consultant and, forced appreciation by making the parent parcel into multiple smaller child parcels, right? It's a bit, man, it's a close subdividing, Johnny. Like, it's the closest thing to alchemy or a money printing machine I've ever seen.
It
honestly, of all the strategies, the challenge is you got to have the money to buy it outright, and you got to
Yeah.
have the patience or time to allow for the subdivide process. But total like profit and forced appreciation, there's nothing like it I've encountered.
Yeah. And, we just actually finished one up right now. If we have a little time after, I'll go through the details, but that one there was pretty cool too. This was in South Carolina. Yeah. And we just wrapped up on it maybe about 2 weeks ago. And yeah, it was one of those where we picked it up for 28.5. And the cool thing is, I noticed, just like you said, that the surrounding lots, this was like in a residential area. So I'm like, okay, and there's a lot of lots that were split up into like smaller lots. And I'm like, hey, this is pretty
Yeah.
cool. And then what I ended up finding out, which I had no idea about, is that this was actually an historic lot. And so when I called the surveyor up and he's like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, I want to split it up as long as each lot has like water and sewer. And he's like, well, this is an historic lot. So you got to actually, you can only split it up into 4. I'm like, oh, okay, that's even better. Yeah, I'm like, I was thinking 1, 2 or 3. He's like, no, I can't
Yeah.
even do that. He goes, because it was originally platted, it was a 4 lot space here. And yeah, and we cut it up in 4 and we listed it. And 4 days later, the agent calls me up and she's like, we have a developer that's offering you full price on all 4 lots. Yeah, it was like a buy for 28.5 and sell for 115 with all
Holy
4 lots together.
What did it cost you to subdivide it?
I think 3,500.
So you guys did it yourself. You didn't have on that one. You didn't have the consultants and.
No, we did it ourselves. Well, I mean, I spoke to this was like the first time I was actually going through one alone. And I spoke to the surveyor and I'm like, hey, listen, and I just kind of told him I've never done this before. So you tell me what
Be
I got to
gentle.
do. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I don't mind paying extra, but just tell me what I'm paying for and what I need to do. Like I just want to make sure that this checks out. And he's like, yeah, no, it's fine. So he came back with me. He came back to me a couple days later and he's like, hey, look, he's like I said, this is an historic lot. So it was originally 4 lots. He goes, we can actually shift them. So you can rotate them, but you got to keep the same 4 lots as is. Right. And so what happened was, I mean, we got that done. And it's funny because I did learn a few things from here. So one, when we sold, the buyer took some time for his due diligence. Everything seemed to check out. And then what the problem we came across was that one lot didn't have sewer. Now, the closest sewer line was the neighboring house had like the sewer there, and it was less than like 50 feet. And the county wouldn't allow the buyer to extend the line. So it kind of does suck a little bit because we lost the sale on that last lot. Okay, so he couldn't take the 4th lot anymore because the sale was contingent on the fact that they would all have water and
Yeah.
sewer. And the last lot, he was trying to fight with the county, saying, "Hey, look, we just want to extend the line. It's like less than 100 feet or something."
Yeah.
And the county gave him a hard time. But one thing, the only mistake, I mean, everything else went smooth. Just that the attorneys told me, hey, look, you subdivided it, but you didn't redeed this, right? So now it's like you got to redeed
Yeah.
all the 4 lots. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
it just flew over my head. I'm like, yeah,
When you
that's
do
the
it
last.
yourself, yeah, I've made that mistake at the beginning too. They're like, well, you can send all the surveyors you want out there and you can record the map all you want, but like the assessor needs like to issue new parcel numbers so they can tax new people, right? On these
Yeah.
new properties. And yeah, I'm with you. I was like, well, shouldn't surveyors just take care of it? You know what I mean? If when they sent me that, can't they do that? Or I would have happily paid them. But when I did these myself, I was kind of the same thing. It was like, there's some oversights, right, when you're doing it yourself. But yeah, that's a great payday because you don't encounter a bunch of those opportunities where the buy price is so low like that,
Yeah.
and you can at the price point you're at. So that's fantastic to get that low purchase price, but also that high ROI and margin. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. And what was really cool is that the buyer actually he owns like 75% of the lots there. So the agent told me, hey, look, if you have anything else in the area, so, this is like also another one of the strategies that you taught me, right, on how to take the
yeah.
sniper approach, right? So it's like, I just mailed out to that whole area there and I'm like, hey, if I could, do this again, I already have a buyer in place. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the first, and I usually ask it as a question first, and then I'll give the answer if somebody doesn't get it right. I'll say, hey, what do we do now? Right? When somebody's real happy with the deal, they just pulled off and they bought and then they sold. They go, what's next? It's like, well, I've got to pull another list, right? And I'm like, well, let's go back to the same fishing hole. Let's fish it dry. So it's like, no, we draw a polygon on a map and we hyper target that immediate area, and we now know what it'll sell for, right? And how days on market and price, right? So now that we know that, sometimes we can go back and offer a little more than we did on the previous one. And the next one might not be as sweet, but we know exactly what it'll sell for and how long it'll take. So I love to kind of go back and repeat in those areas and just fish the holes dry before we move on, right? Versus just pulling a large new countywide campaign.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Well, I love it, man. So that's kind of the growth. It's the kind of the evolution, the growth of things is either a couple of things for you is you identify like, okay, I can only go so far if I always only just use my own money, right? I might need to bring in other partners, other people's money. It's kind of an epiphany or growth I see along your journey. And then I also see like, and then you go, okay, not just like flip, flip, flip. Let's see if we can add value or force appreciation through like, instead of just repeating what's comfortable, like a single flip, you go, let's learn something new that I might make some mistakes on and have to watch a game film on later and see what I did wrong, not getting, new deeds and new legal descriptions and right. But right through that, I'll learn a new strategy that has a bigger payday. Right. So that's the cool thing is kind of watching you accelerate through the growth. And at the same time, what I would say, like, just from my vantage is you're not like I would say like a really like a systems and a process guy. And like, hey, I'm going to build out the team. Here's my org chart. Some people go that route, right? And some people are more systems and team and departmentalize and build it like that. You're kind of like, hey, I'm going to get on the phone. I'm just going to work the phone. And the phone is the biggest money maker there is. So kind of is, I would say a lot of this you've accomplished is pretty much like a solo act with just like a lot of consistent action and the right attitude and right mindset.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, you're right on that. And it's something I've been trying to improve. I'm like, you know what? You hear so many people in the space, right? And they have their system set up, and there are a lot of like rock stars that are just, they got it down packed to like a science. And it's something that I vowed to like work on more in 2025. I'm like, I got to get my system set up. But at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, you know what? It's like the one thing, right? Like I break it down to like the smallest thing. I'm like, okay, well, what do I need to get a sale? Well, I got to get them on the phone, right? I mean, I got to call people, right? I mean, I could build up the most, I could build the most intricate CRM system and lead flow and here and there. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, that stuff is super important. And, I mean, obviously it makes your life a lot easier, but I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm like, who can I call? And I just, I go back to some old leads, and I have no issue, calling people back after six months or so. I mean, let's face it. For all they know, I could just lie to them and tell them, "Hey, we spoke a month ago." They get so many calls. I mean, they don't even remember.
Yeah, so much marketing. And the other thing is that's sometimes it's easier to like draw up a flow chart and a process or build a stage or build a pipeline, and people procrastinate on picking up the phone. So I'm with you on that. There's just like an extrovert that's an action taker picking up a phone will close more deals as a solo act than a team of 5 or 6 with all their systems and processes. But nobody wants to be nobody wants to be the one making the outgoing calls, right? You need somebody that's in that role, right? So if it was when you're starting out, if that's you, I think that's a big key to the success, because then you can kind of take your profits and justify, okay, now I'll hire the VA. Now I'll hire this. Now I'll do these things. Right. And I'm not doing it out of savings, you know what I mean? Or my own money. I'm kind of using house money from profit of deals. And then after you've wore all the hats yourself anyway, you kind of know better how to manage those roles, right? Versus hiring too early and getting too big. So yeah, I think that's a big part of what you're doing is manage just a willingness to work the phones. And like you say, like circle back to leads, follow up, with leads. We've got a big deal going on. I'll share with everybody. We've got a big deal we're working on together right now that you're doing. 154 acre. We should talk about that before we wrap things up. 154 acre parcel in God's country, right? The last best place up in Montana. that we're working on together. And this is going to be a big subdivide. You had a call today on it. We've been talking all week. A number of different scenarios we can do on this thing, but it looks like at minimum it probably should be a $200,000 equity capture. After we get through the subdivide, right?
Yeah.
For you, and maybe more if we end up doing a major subdivision instead of a minor. But that's a long way, buying $300,000 properties and adding $200,000 to $300,000 in appreciation, right? That's a lot more zeros. That's a lot bigger deal when we started working together and we're targeting $5,000 and $10,000 lots, right?
Yeah, I didn't sleep for a few nights. I was like, oh, I was weighing this, and I'm like, oh God, it's like you said, right? It's a long way from those, the 1 acre lots in Arizona. So I was like, okay, I'm like, this is different, but super exciting. This is awesome, man. I can't wait. You know what? Yeah, like I said, I'm planning on flying out there too, just to kind of
Yeah.
check it out myself and see what it's all about. So
Yeah, you're gonna fly down, walk the property, right? Check it out. I'm not, dude. I'm not going. You can call me, you can FaceTime me, right? But yeah, I think it's gonna be for you not only a big notch on the belt, right? When we get through it all, I think heck, it's gonna be like a year. That one deal, one
Yeah.
project would I would think be better than most people's year, and most people's salary. But also, I think like for you, when you're on the other side of this a year or 18 months from now, the growth you're going to have after working with the power companies, right? The survey company, like everything we have to go through to do this type of subdivide at this scale. I think that you're going to be well positioned, right, for future projects as well.
Yeah, and you know what? And that's the thing. I'd rather take this deal. I mean, rather than having to do the same thing I've been doing, even if I had to equate to the same profit, just because I mean, look, I'm learning something new, right? So I'm learning about all the ups and downs. What can go wrong, I mean, anything at all, right? From A to Z. And the learning process is invaluable, right? I mean, like just getting through this, like you said, right, I'll be better equipped moving forward and say, hey, like I've done this before, so like I have a checklist now of what to follow and what to go through. So no, I definitely love it. I mean, look, I know like everything else it's gonna have its challenges, but no, I'm ready. I mean, this
Well,
is what I do it for.
I think that's the thing about you too, is you're kind of like you're a heck no or a heck yeah type of guy, right? Where
Yeah.
you're like either I'm all in or I'm all out. There's no like, well, I'm midway. Like I remember like till years ago after we Coach 101, I said, hey Johnny, I'm starting this thing called a mastermind, right? Like I'm gonna do this mastermind. I text you, I'm like, you gotta. I didn't really say. I'm like, you gotta sign up. And
Yeah.
you're like, I'm in, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, there wasn't like, well,
Yeah.
how much does it cost? And like, what could my potential return on investment be? And what are the topics next month? You're like, all right, if you tell me I need to do this, Travis, I'm going to do it. And then like that's where we introduce subdividing, right? We start talking about subdividing. So when something comes up, you saw it and said, hey, wait a minute, I've been through this. So you're that kind of guy where I know that like, hey, if, like for you, you're like, yeah, I'm all in, I'm all out, right? And then I would just say like being an action taker is a big part, of your success. The other thing is that like if people didn't pick up on it through listening, is you start out like saying, hey, I'm coaching, like I'm personal training, I'm coaching somebody, and then I know another guy who's coaching over here, and through this, right, like each opportunity along the way for you, whether I'm sure you're already introspected or held up a mirror, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but it seems to you like every opportunity or the next opportunity has been through like a social connection or a network or a person. It's not like, hey, you're hitting the books and then going out on your own. You're like, okay, I connected with this guy, or I went to this seminar or this person, right? So it seems to me like kind of a common denominator for your success is those connections, that network and seeking out and connecting with people. And then when you call sellers, being on the phone, kind of being in the people business, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. You're right. It all comes down to just don't be I mean, you want to be in a room where where everyone is smarter than you are, right? And that's how I've always faced everything. It's like, hey, if I need to learn, let me just go find the best people that are doing this and just try to learn from them, right? And see what they have to offer. So yeah, that's pretty much how I approach everything. And I mean, I think it's worked out for me. So
I think
Yeah.
it's working.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, heck yeah, it is for, yeah, man, you're a blessed man, dude. You've had
Yeah.
a great run, a great stretch. You definitely, without question, had within a year, I would say, like a lot of heavy stuff to deal with, right? You had gym business is like shut down or temporarily shut down during COVID lockdown, right?
Yeah.
You're engaged, and then baby on the way, and then
Yeah.
like there's a lot of things all at once, right? Like income dries up, we're
Yeah.
engaged, baby on the way, what's next, right? So
Yeah.
it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You had to like forge through.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But
Yeah.
yeah, why don't you just share with that about kind of what you're on the personal front, kind of your last 3-4 years? Because dude, you are blessed. You've had a great stretch of yours, and go, yeah, just go ahead, and then I'll talk a little more about the, kind of the personal side.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so two young girls now. They're 2 years apart. So my oldest is 2 years old, 2 years and 9 months actually. I think tomorrow. And yeah, and I mean, so engaged in 2019, and then COVID pretty much threw our wedding plans, which were supposed to be in Mexico. So that didn't happen anymore. So then my wife got pregnant, and we had our first daughter in 2022, and my youngest daughter Savannah was just born last March. And so yeah, I haven't slept in about 2.5 years, so that's great, right?
Amen,
uh
dude. Look at these black circles, these eyes here. This is like a decade. I've got four. I've got a
yeah.
7-month-old right now, and then I've got a 16-year-old driver and a 6-month-old. Okay, so and that's where
You're
this
right.
came from. Was not like partying or staying out at the bar with the guys, right? This is like waking up and helping out with the kids for a decade straight.
Yeah, you know what,
Yeah,
I didn't
you'll
think of
get
that. I'm
through it.
like, I'm telling this to the wrong guy, but yeah,
Yeah,
no, but yeah, no, it's been crazy. So the last 3 years, yeah, exactly. So we actually had to close our gym down. So we tried to keep it afloat shortly after the lockdown, but I mean, we had incurred so much damage. So the gym closed down. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of uncertainty, right? I mean, at a point I was like, okay, well, like, what do I do now? Do we need to sell some of the rentals? Like, I mean, like,
yeah,
what if this land thing doesn't work, right? Like, I mean, I saw the mortgage note space kind of change
yeah,
dramatically from, like, 2018 when I got into, like, 2022. It's funny because actually one of my mentors at the time, he called me up about a month ago, and he's like, hey, he's like, you were kind of smart enough to pivot. He's like, this
yeah.
space is kind of like really taking a hit right now. He's like, what are you up to? And like, we just start talking about land, and I got to get back to him eventually, because I think he was somewhat interested. But yeah, there's been a lot of, I mean, the last 3 years have been crazy. So
Well, when we
um
see the rats flee in the Titanic, we know, right? Something's up. It's time to it's time for us to start
exactly.
looking for a lifeboat ahead of everybody else, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
there definitely things, life cycles and market shifts, things change, right? Like you've now been through a market shift, interest rates increase. You're in Canada, so you can't, like, I would say you can't complain as passionately about the administrations, that we have that presidential administrations as we can down here, right? But at the same time, they affect you, So I'm hoping that you're looking at, a good real estate market, with this new administration to come. But why don't you share that too with people? How there's even like the currency exchange on that one deal we had with the Subdivide at the time. The dollar's still strong, but at the time it was really strong. And you told me, hey, Travis, it wasn't just that we forced appreciation after the
Yeah.
Subdivide. I brought every US dollar back, and it was worth what, $1.30 or something up there?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole thing, right? When you're getting lots funded, I mean, obviously when you're self-funding, it's a different story, right? Because I mean, it comes out to the same
Yeah,
thing. But getting the money, getting the lots funded, I was like, wow. And you don't think about it that way, right? Because I mean, I'm in Canada, right? So to me, it's just like, okay. And then when, once it got converted, I'm like, oh wow. I'm like, okay,
yeah,
this could really work. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
and now, it's funny because I think now the dollar's gained even more
Well,
traction. So
we have what they're calling the Trump bump, right? After
yeah,
Trump won the election, we paid our VA. My wife paid, some of our VAs, and one of our VAs, she called and she's like, "Oh, well, not called. She slacked back, and she's
yeah,
like, I think that you accidentally paid me too much. She's like, could you just check to see the Wise account what you sent over or how much of my wife's check?" She's like, no, I paid you what I always pay you. And she's like, well, let me look into it on my end. And then she's in the Philippines, right? And then she comes back, she goes, oh, I guess it's the dollar went up so much. Like, she's like, that on our end, right, we got a lot more than I was expecting because of the exchange, right? And that's kind of right now the Trump bump right now, right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I had a VA. I mean, she's not. I'm not texting right now at the moment. So, but one of the guys at the gym needed some work to be done, like some tedious contract work. So I'm like, hey, listen, I got a VA. You can maybe reach out to her and she'll help you out. So he does that. Everything goes good, and then he pays her. Well, actually, I paid her because I have a Wise account. So I'm like, hey, listen, I'll just pay her. You shoot me back the money whenever. So I think it costed them like $60 US, right? And then he gives me like 85 Canadian. I'm like, whoa. I'm like, no, it's too much, And I'm still thinking, and I'm like, it's like, no, it's $84 and some change. I'm like, man, I'm like, the dollar's really good on there. I'm like, all right, cool. So I mean, again, you don't think about it, but yeah, I mean, I guess the Trump bump is,
it's real, right?
It's real. It's real.
And even when it's not the Trump, when the dollar's strong, right? When that exchange is there, it just makes sense. So that's kind of like you're kind of like double dipping there, right? Where you're forcing appreciation and you're getting that currency exchange. So yeah, that's pretty sweet.
I'm sure my accountant's going to have something to say about that, but I mean,
we'll wait. He's going to say, well, yeah, you also get to pay taxes in both countries or something, right? Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, slow down.
But, that's ours this year. He's like, okay, you got to go buy a vehicle. I'm like, wait, what? We tax plan quarterly. Why do I got to go buy a new vehicle? Like, well, you made more than you were supposed to in the last quarter. I'm like, I guess that's a good problem. But do I really got to buy a vehicle? So yeah. Awesome, man. Well, yeah, happy to see your growth. It's been awesome. And also see on the personal front, the blessings you've got. I know we were chatting last night and I texted you. I said, hey, we got to talk about this subdivide situation and what we can and can't do. And you're like, hey, I'm putting my daughter down. And then I was like, well, I'm about to pick my son up. So we're like, we both had our priorities. We're talking about this $250,000 profit deal. And they're like, well, I'm too busy. Like I've got to put my daughter down. I'm like, well, I'm too busy. I got to pick my son up from baseball. So we got our priorities straight is what I'll say. That's a good thing. But when we did sync up, I said, how did it go? And you said, well, good. I only had to read her about 5 books to get her down to sleep, right?
Yeah.
Oh, dude, and it just brought me back. My oldest, who when I was talking to you, I was driving. He was in the passenger seat. I was picking him up from some baseball training, and man, that kid, same thing. I used to have to read this kid 5 or 6 books to get him to sleep, and by the end of 5 or 6 books, I was like, my eye was starting to fade, and I was starting to fall asleep, and he was still up and ready for the next one. So it's amazing how these little critters, these little creatures can just, outrun us. Their motors never end, right?
Yeah. I mean, I even try to change up the story. I'm like, oh, look at that. And then the bear climbed up the tree and then he went home, the end, and I'm like, the next book. And she knows, she's like, no, wait, she goes, you missed out all these pages. And I'm like, oh, sorry. I didn't see them.
They'll figure you out. They're like, you're skipping words and pages, Dad. Like, they're going to be on to you. It'll work for a minute, but a year from now, they'll know what you're doing. Awesome, man. Well, hey, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. And obviously we'll be in touch as we're working on projects and stuff together. But congrats, man, on all the success, and look forward to, what's ahead.
Yeah,
like the continued growth.
Absolutely. And Travis, listen, man, thank you so much. Honestly, like I tell everybody that, I wouldn't be where I'm at in the land space if it weren't for you. So I tell people that the famous story about when I first called you, and it was like a 15-minute free call, and we spoke for 40 minutes. And I was even surprised that I got you on the phone. I'm like, I'm calling Travis King. I'm expecting like his sales rep or something. And I tell everybody that story, and I'm like, man, this is a guy who like genuinely loves, the land space and loves to help people, and took an extra 30 minutes just on a free call to talk to me. There was no upselling, there was nothing at all, and I knew then and there. And hey, man, I want to, now that I can do this on the platform, just put it out there. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. I really wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So thanks for everything, man. I owe you one, man. Next time I come down.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And man, thanks for doing your part. That's what, all the information in the world, right? It's no good if you don't implement it and take action. So without question, I appreciate you. All right. Thanks, man. Johnny.
No problem, Travis. Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning into The King Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Also, don't forget to head over to travisking.com for show notes, resources, bonus content, and more ways to connect with me and the guests that you hear on the show. Remember, greatness is already within you. It's time for you to boss up and claim it. Stop building someone else's empire and start building your own.